I say it's time to do another Calgary Flames trade retrospect. Hi there, it's Brett Hornby here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As a Calgary sports fan like myself, that's what I mostly do on my YouTube channel, so if that all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. Well, I've done some various Calgary Flames trade retrospects, and I'd say let's take a look at the time when we acquired Joe Mullen from the St. Louis Blues. As if you look back on the 1989 Stanley Cup Championship team, he's actually one of the players that sometimes even I overlook and quietly mention, oh yeah, we have Joe Mullen as well. You know, the big names like Ryan McDonald and Jim Poplinski and Mike Vernon as well, with Al MacInnis and Gary Suter. But let's remember the time and look back on when the Calgary Flames acquired Joe Mullen. And actually, when I did my last trade respect where I talked about the time when we acquired Ryan McDonald, actually there was a comment by Glass Steel and say, have I done one on Joe Mullen? So no, I haven't, but figured let's take a look at it. And I would say the Calgary Flames did very, very well with this trade as well. If you go back to February 1st, 1986, when I do make these Calgary Flames trade retrospect videos, I try to line it up around the same time of the year when the trade happened. And at the time, the Calgary Flames were looking at getting a significant offensive force and add to the lineup. And I'm going to say we did very, very well. And ultimately, you could say Joe Mullen was one of the big pieces for the Calgary Flames that led us to the Stanley Cup Championship win. He led the team in scoring in 1989 with 110 points and tied with Joe Nieuwendyk with 51 goals. And he was also second in the Calgary Flames scoring in the playoffs, as I'll get to when I look at his numbers shortly, behind Al MacInnis when Al MacInnis won the Conn Smythe Trophy. And at the time, Joe Mullen was the highest scoring American-born player. Since then, Mike Modano and Phil Housley has surpassed him. So how this trade worked is that there were three players being traded on each side. So 6 players in total were traded from the Calgary Flames to the St. Louis Blues. So who did the Calgary Flames give up to get Joe Mullen? That ultimately was one of the top scoring threats for the Calgary Flames during the 1989 Stanley Cup Championship team. And may I add that this was also interesting that that was the first season that the Calgary Flames went to the Stanley Cup Finals when we loaded up and got Joe Mullen, and we happened to play the St. Louis Blues in the third round that season. So another interesting tidbit as well. So the Calgary Flames, they sent defenseman Terry Johnson, we sent forward Eddie Beers, I should say, to the St. Louis Blues, with defenseman Charlie Bourgeois, if I said the name right, and forward Gino Cavallini. Coming to the Calgary Flames was defenseman Terry Johnson, and then forward Joe Mullen, and defenseman Rick Wilson. So we'll take a look at all the 6 players, what happened to them in this deal, that ultimately what happened to them, how the impacts of their team, or not as much as well. So as I mentioned, this trade happened back in 1986, a month before the trade deadline, because I think another trade retrospect that I'll look back on a month later for March 1986, looking back, that I think we'll take a look at a trade that the Calgary Flames, I would say, made their first major rental. That was a part of their team to at least get to the finals for the first time. So let's talk about Joe Mullen first. Ultimately, he played 16 seasons in the National Hockey League, starting off with the St. Louis Blues, and then eventually with the Calgary Flames, where I would say he had his best numbers, his best career years with the Calgary Flames. Then ultimately he went to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and actually he won 2 more Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Then he ultimately ended off his career with the Boston Bruins, and it spanned from 1980 to 1997. So he had a nice long career for this now Hockey Hall of Famer, who he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2000. And I mentioned at the beginning, he was at the time the highest scoring American-born player. Mike Modano and Phil Housley has surpassed him. As I mentioned, he won the Cup with the Calgary Flames in 1989, and then he also was on the Stanley Cup Championship teams from 1991 to 1992 of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then he turned to coaching in 2000 after he retired and got inducted in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He was briefly the head coach of the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, which is the farm team of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then he had a 10-year tenure with the Philadelphia Flyers as an assistant coach from 2007 to 2017. And he was born in New York and actually in the neighborhood Hell's Kitchen. Yes, there is actually a neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen in New York, not to be confused with Gordon Ramsay and his reality TV show where he makes being in the kitchen a living hell if you watch that show. But other thing that's interesting with Joe Mullen, for a player that eventually became, at the time, the highest scoring American-born player and got inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2000, he was not drafted. Joe Mullen was an undrafted free agent. He first was playing with the Boston College, and he led the Central Hockey League, CHL, American score in 1980, as the most valuable player as a member of the Salt Lake Golden Eagles. And then he also won the Lay Bing Trophy with the Calgary Flames as well as the most generally award. This is the other part of his career. And then there used to be the Plus Minus Award that they used to award for the best plus minus that he won as a Calgary Flame. He was a first-team All-Star in 1989 as a Calgary Flame, and he was an All-Star in 3 separate occasions. However, he mentioned that he played on the U.S. team many times, including 3 Canada Cups. He was the first American-born player to get those 2 big milestones that we look on for players for being a future Hall of Famer in 500 goals and 1,000 points. And then he received the Lester Patrick Trophy in 1995 for recognition for contributions for hockey in the U.S. And then mentioned he was in the Hockey Hall of Fame in the year 2000, but he went to the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame in 1998. So that's just the gist of Joe Mullen's career, that he had an unconventional way of getting into the NHL, because he did start off on a partial scholarship with Boston College. Another American-born player that currently plays for the Calgary Flames also played at Boston College, and he actually said he paid $700 out of his own pocket his first year, and then in his freshman he scored 34 points in 24 games, and then the school eventually gave him a scholarship. And then eventually, after his successful college career, but he did not get picked up in the NHL, he ultimately signed as a free agent with the St. Louis Blues, and actually he turned down the chance to play on the U.S. Olympic team in 1980, which now is known as the Miracle on Ice. That he actually turned that down to play with the St. Louis Blues. So that's how his career started with the St. Louis Blues before going to the Calgary Flames. And if you're looking at his career statistics, I mean, his best season with Boston College with the Eagles was 1977-78. In 34 games, he had 34 goals, 34 assists for 68 points, so 2 points a game. And then ultimately, he was on the Salt Lake Golden Eagles in the College Hockey League. In 75 games, he scored 40 goals, 32 assists for 72 points. And then in 13 playoff games, he had 9 goals, 11 assists for 20 points. So he definitely proved to be a sniper, and then there's actually he had one season in 1980-81 after he was signed with the St. Louis Blues organization, which was their farm team. In 80 games, he scored 59 goals, 58 assists for 117 points, and in 17 playoff games, he had 11 goals, 9 assists for 20 points. So that was the 1980-81 season. But when it comes to the St. Louis Blues, his finest season as a St. Louis Blue was in 1984-85, where in 79 games he scored 40 goals, 52 assists for 92 points, but St. Louis definitely didn't have as much success in the playoffs at that time, and the Calgary Flames were looking to add a sniper. And actually it says in here that Joe Mullen, who never was traded before in his NHL career, at first he didn't seem happy about getting traded to the Calgary Flames, but then when he came to the Calgary Flames, we greeted him with open arms, and he was impressed by the reception. So he quickly turned happy to become a Calgary Flame, because in 1985-86 season, before he got traded to the Calgary Flames, he played 48 games that season. He was over a point of game apace, where he scored back in 1985-86 28 goals, 24 assists for 52 points. And then when he came to the Calgary Flames for the rest of the season, in 29 games he had 16 goals, 22 assists for 38 points. And then we went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals that year, but eventually lost to the Montreal Canadiens, where they had this stud young goalie named Patrick Waugh. That was a big difference. Well, in 21 games, he scored 12 goals, 7 assists for 19 points. So he definitely showed he could score the big one in the playoffs. And then in 86-87, he had a 47-goal season and 87 points. And then in 87-88, he had 80 in 80 games. He had 40 goals and 84 points. So he definitely proved that he can continue on his goal-scoring pace with the Calgary Flames, because he had 40-goal seasons with the St. Louis Blues in 1983, 84, and 84-85, where he scored 41 and 40 respectively. And then I mentioned in 1988-89, Joe Mullen's finest season in the NHL. In 79 games, he scored 51 goals, scored 59 assists for 110 points, and that led the Calgary Flames in scoring that season, and he was tied with Joe Nieuwendyk in his second season in the NHL with 51 goals. And then he only had 16 penalty minutes, where he got the Lady Byng Trophy as well. So Joe Mullen is also in history, Calgary Flames history with that as well. And then in the Stanley Cup Playoffs in 21 games, where we won the Stanley Cup, he led the team in scoring with goals with 16 and 8 assists for 24 points and only 4 penalty minutes. So Joe Mullen was definitely a finesse, high-scoring forward that doesn't spend much time in the penalty box. So he's one of those finesse, quiet, humble forwards that, he was a sniper, but he wasn't really talked about as much. And then his last season with the Calgary Flames, he definitely tailed off from that career era that he had with the Calgary Flames. In 78 games, he had 36 goals, 33 assists, 69 points. And then we bowed out to the Los Angeles Kings in 6 games. The following season, we were looking to defend the Stanley Cup title. Well, he actually had 3 goals in 6 games. So then the Calgary Flames were concerned about his age. So ultimately what happened with Joe Mullen was that we traded him at the 1990 NHL entry draft for the Pittsburgh Penguins second-round draft pick, which turned out to be used on defenseman Nicolas Perreault, who he didn't pan out for the Calgary Flames. He never played in the NHL, but I would say the 5 seasons that we had Joe Mullen, he definitely had his finest career numbers with the Calgary Flames, including winning first of 3 Stanley Cups. But then when he went to the Pittsburgh Penguins, the first season he battled some injuries, because in 1990-1991, and that's interestingly as well, when the Calgary Flames acquired Joe Mullen from the St. Louis Blues. At the time, Bob Johnson was the head coach of the Calgary Flames, who I personally think is the best head coach that the Calgary Flames have had to date. Another coach that had an unconventional, run to the NHL as head coach, as he was a college American head coach that was signed and had success at the Calgary Flames, and then eventually he went to the Pittsburgh Penguins. So in that first season when he was with Pittsburgh, where they ultimately won the Stanley Cup, he played under Bob Johnson again. But he only played 47 games in the regular season, scoring 17 goals, 22 assists for 39 points. However, in the playoffs, when they won their first Stanley Cup, in 22 games, he had 8 goals, 9 assists for 17 points. And then he had a little bit of a resurgence the following season, 1991-92, where the Pittsburgh Penguins eventually went on to win the Stanley Cup again. In 77 games, he scored 42 goals, 45 assists for 87 points. And then he only played in 9 playoff games that season. He had 3 goals, 1 assist for 4 points. So he had one more 40-goal season in 91-92. Then 92-93, he had a 33-goal season for 70 points. And then 93-94, in 84 games, he had 38 goals and 70 points for his career. And then things started tailing off a little bit towards the end of his career as age catches up. But I think we might have given up on Joe Mullen a little too soon, because he still showed that he could still score. I mean, in 94-95, that was a lockout-shortened season. I mean, he had 16 goals, 21 assists for 37 points. And then I know when he got to the Boston Bruins, the Pittsburgh Penguins, it almost felt like he was slowly holding on too long. But he played for the Boston Bruins in 95-96 in 37 games. He only had 8 goals, 7 assists, 15 points, and it looked like, maybe it was time to retire and say hats off to a great career. But he wanted to get that 500th goal in 96-97. He played 54 games. He scored 7 goals, 15 assists for 22 points. And that's where ultimately he did score his 500th goal in his NHL career, because he already had his 1,000 points in the bag. And he was a Hall of Famer, even if he didn't hit that. But I remember when he scored his 500th goal, he was freaking happy. And it kind of felt a little good for Joe Mullen at that time, knowing he held on very good. But overall in his NHL career, he played 1,062 games. He scored 502 goals, and he had 561 assists for 1,063 points, and he did that all with only 241 penalty minutes. And then in 143 Stanley Cup playoff games, where ultimately he won 3 Stanley Cups and had 1 trip to the Stanley Cup final, he scored 60 goals, 46 points for 106 points altogether. 60 goals, 146 assists for 106 points altogether. But Joe Mullen definitely had his career year, his best numbers ultimately with the Calgary Flames after we brought him in. So that's all about Joe Mullen, and I remember that his number, I believe, is retired by the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I did remember one time, shortly after he retired, the Pittsburgh Penguins were playing the Calgary Flames, and they retired his number in that, as well as the St. Louis Blues. They honored Joe Mullen, number 7, as well, with a couple other players. I know Keith Tkachuk is one of them as well. But that was Joe Mullen. I'm going to say the Calgary Flames did very well, as we got the best player in the deal as well. So when it comes to the other assets that the Calgary Flames had, well, they definitely did not make much of an impact. Because when you look at Terry Johnson, he actually played with the Calgary Flames for the rest. He did actually play for the Calgary Flames for the rest of the 1985-86 season, including the playoffs. However, he was eventually traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs the following season for defenseman Jim Corrin, who eventually got flipped to the Buffalo Sabres for defenseman Brian Engblom, and he didn't have much of an impact with the Calgary Flames. Because if you look at the other players in the trade as well, I mean, Terry Johnson, at the time when he played for the Calgary Flames, he played 24 games with the Calgary Flames. He had a goal, 4 assists for 5 points. Keep in mind, he's a defenseman. And then he did play in 17 playoff games where we went to the Stanley Cup Finals and picked up 3 assists. Overall, in his NHL career, he did play 285 games, only scoring 3 goals, 24 assists for 24 points, or 27 points. Then he played in 38 Stanley Cup playoff games overall in his NHL career for 4 assists. Well, half of that came with the Calgary Flames as well. I mean, at the time when he got traded to the Calgary Flames from the St. Louis Blues in 1985-86, he had 4 assists in 49 games as well, so he was a very defensive defenseman. And he actually did also spend some time playing for the Calgary Canucks and the University of Calgary Dinos, because he's actually from Calgary as well. So that was the little impact that we had with Terry Johnson in part of the trade. And then the last part of the trade, which was looking at Rick Wilson. Well, his time was very, very short with the Calgary Flames, because he only played a grand total of 2 games with the Calgary Flames before he got sent down to the American Hockey League, where at the time the Calgary Flames farm team was the Moncton Golden Flames. And then actually a month later at the trade deadline, so a month after we made this trade to get Joey Mullen, Rick Wilson got traded to the, who was traded for forward Tom McMurchie. If you look at Tom McMurchie, he was traded, let's look at the team who he traded Tom McMurchie for. He was traded for the, hang on here, he was traded for Tom McMurchie at the deadline, so, and he never played for the Calgary Flames, so that is all I have for that side of the trade. When it comes to Joe Mullen, as well as Rick Wilson and Terry Johnson, but we definitely got the best player in the deal as well. I would say the big part of the trade why the St. Louis Blues, I would say, kind of a little got hosed on this is because they did not get as full value when it comes to getting Joe Mullen, but they did get a couple good assets with a couple of players in this trade. First, Eddie Beers, who actually ultimately ended his career with the St. Louis Blues. Well, Ed Beers, he was first the Calgary Flame. We signed him for the 1981-82 season. And at the time when he got traded to the St. Louis Blues and the Calgary Flames, 1985-86, in 33 games, he had 11 goals, 10 assists, or 21 points. His best season as a Calgary Flame, Eddie Beers, was in 1983-84, where in 73 games he had 36 goals, 39 assists, or 75 points. However, when he went to the St. Louis Blues in 1985-86, in 24 games, he played 24 games, he had scored 7 goals, 11 assists for 18 points, and then in 19 playoff games, he had 3 goals, 4 assists for 7 points when the St. Louis Blues went to the Conference Championship. But that was it for the Eddie Beers, because he was done in the NHL after 1985-86 86. Overall in his NHL career, he had 250 games, 94 goals, 116 assists for 210 points, and then the 41 Stanley Cup playoff games, he had 7 goals, 10 assists for 17 points. So that's all I have for Eddie Beers when it comes to that side of the trade. And then if you look at Charlie Bourgeois' NHL career, he eventually was traded to the Hartford Whalers in 1989 for a third-round pick, and then with a third-round pick, and then they got a third-round pick with the St. Louis Blues, which they used on Rick Corvo. But when I look at Charlie Bourgeois, who was a defenseman, he actually played 3 seasons with the St. Louis Blues before playing that one game with the Hartford Whalers. Overall in his NHL career, he played 290 games, scored 16 goals, 54 assists for 70 points for 788 penalty minutes. So he was a harder-nosed defenseman. And then in 40 Stanley Cup playoff games, he scored 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 points. When it comes to the Calgary Flames, as he was signed with the Calgary Flames, his best season with the Calgary Flames, actually, if you look at his offense, was this first season in 1981-82, as he played 54 games. He had 2 goals, 13 assists for 15 points, and then in 3 playoff games, he had no points. And then at the time when we traded him, in 29 games, he had 5 goals, 5 assists for 10 points. And then when he went to the St. Louis Blues, he played 31 games and scored 2 goals, 7 assists for 9 points. And then in 19 Stanley Cup playoff games, where St. Louis went to the Conference Championship, he had 2 goals, 2 assists for 4 points as a defenseman, but 116 penalty minutes. Wow. So he's definitely a hard-nosed defenseman. I would say his best season that Charlie Bourgeois had with the St. Louis Blues was the following season, 1986-87, where he had 66 games. He had 2 goals, 12 assists for 14 points and 164 penalty minutes. And then that was all for Charlie Bourgeois. And then the last player that the St. Louis Blues got, which you could probably say might have got the most out of it as well, because they also had Paul Cavallini. He is the brother of Gino Cavallini, is the brother of Paul Cavallini, and they actually played together with the St. Louis Blues. Well, he actually only played a couple seasons with the Calgary Flames before we traded him. He was up and down between the Moncton Golden Flames, but at the time when we traded him, he played 27 games with the Calgary Flames. He scored 7 goals, 7 assists for 14 points. And then when he went to the St. Louis Blues, in 30 games, he had 6 goals, 5 assists for 11 points. And then in 17 playoff games, he had 4 goals, 5 assists for 9 points. And that was the second time he was in the playoffs. He played 3 games in 1985 playoffs with the Calgary Flames, but he had no points. But his best season with the St. Louis Blues, I would say this is the player that the St. Louis Blues benefited most with the Joe Mullen trade, but definitely did not break the impact that he had with the Calgary Flames, was in the 1990-91 season. In 78 games, he had 8 goals, 27 assists, 35 points. Then the season before, in 1989-90 with the St. Louis Blues, in 80 games, he had 15 goals, 15 assists for 30 points. So that's what we look at when it comes to Gino Cavallini overall in his NHL career. He also played with the Quebec Nordiques before he spent some time in the International Hockey League and overseas in Europe. He played 593 NHL games altogether, scoring 114 goals, 159 assists for 273 points and 507 penalty minutes. Then 74 playoff games. He had 14 goals, 19 assists, 33 points in 74 Stanley Cup playoff games. So looking back at this trade, it was definitely a good one for the Calgary Flames, as the Calgary Flames was able to add a sniper that they were looking in the lineup, and ultimately paid immediate dividends and got warmed up to right away by the fans. And after he shook off not being happy about being traded to the Calgary Flames from the St. Louis Blues, he had his best offensive seasons with the Calgary Flames, including his best career year where he had 110 points and 51 goals, led the team in scoring, and was a part of the 1989 Stanley Cup Championship team. And then he was able to still parlay that with the Pittsburgh Penguins by winning 2 more Stanley Cups in 1991 and 1992, and eventually get inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. So going back to Joe Mullen, as I say, I remember him more as just that humble, player that he's not a, loud, vocal player as well. I think I'll find a quote on on this Wikipedia page from the late Brad McCrimmon, who was a teammate of Joe Mullen, including the 1989 Stanley Cup year. It says, Mully spent a career excelling in areas of the ice that a lot of guys wouldn't visit on the threat of death. Great balance on his skates, great desire, great teammate, and a great little guy with a big talent and a huge heart. And that's what Brad McCrimmon said. So that's kind of like the best way to describe Joe Mullen. I mean, he wasn't a physical player. I mean, he won the Lady Byng Trophy after all for being the most generally conducted player in the league. And ultimately, Joe Mullen won it, while ultimately Yuri Hudler and Johnny Gaudreau also won the Lady Byng Trophy as well. But Joe Mullen was the first one that won it as a Calgary Flame. But you almost have to wonder, could this be a player that the Calgary Flames could look back on and maybe induct? Could he be someone that you could say should be at least a forever Flame? Not necessarily retire his number. I would say he was the best Flame to ever wear number 7. And then the fact that he's from New York, he kind of has that Boston accent. He definitely has that, accent for sure. It almost sounds Boston to me. I don't know. You have to hear sound bites of him. And all I can find on YouTube when you look up Joe Mullen is that there's more tributes to him showing him his time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, that's where he achieved his milestones and won 2 more Stanley Cups. There is a video of Joe Mullen that apparently he was doing a promo for the Calgary Sioux wearing a Calgary Flames jersey, and that's all I could find. But this is my Calgary Flames trade retrospect on Joe Mullen. I mean, I was only 3 turning 4 at the time, but I definitely remember Joe Mullen both, as a Calgary Flame. And then when I saw the Pittsburgh Penguins win the Stanley Cup, and I had to ask, hey, is that the same Joe Mullen that won the Stanley Cup with us? And it ultimately was. I think looking back, I mean, I guess also the pressure, the economics at the time, but I felt like the Calgary Flames gave up on Joe Mullen as he still had a couple more good seasons, but it was definitely great for him where he got to go back to closer to home after he spent some time in Calgary, after he won his first Stanley Cup, to win a couple more Stanley Cups, and then ultimately get the biggest honor of getting inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And that's where, if you look back at the 1989 Calgary Flames roster, there's definitely a lot more Hall of Famers. I mean, Lyle McDonald's in there, and then you got Joe Mullen, Doug Gilmour, and you also got Al McInnes, and then you also can make a case for maybe, Darren Fleury or Mike Vernon as well. I mean, those are all the names that come to the top of my mind right now, but it's fun to look back at some of these trade retrospects where things actually work out for the Calgary Flames. I know I've already talked about, I talked about the Darren Fleury when we traded him to Colorado. I talked about, Joe Nieuwendyk, because that's another name that's on my mind, because I talked about that trade respect when we acquired him for Jerome McGinley, who eventually became another Hall of Famer. And then, yes, I did talk about the Jerome McGinley trade retrospects, and then, there's going to be a few more trade retrospects I'm going to talk about concerning the St. Louis Blues, because I already talked about this trade. I talked about the time when we traded Jay Bouwmeester away, but I got a couple other off-season trade retrospects that I want to talk about that also involve the St. Louis Blues, so you can see that in the playlist as well. But I just say, what do you think of this trade? It was definitely a great one for the Calgary Flames, as it was one of the pieces that ultimately came together that helped the Calgary Flames to win that Stanley Cup in 1989, and paid immediate dividends after he shook off not being happy about coming to the Calgary Flames. But he was impressed, for how obsessed we are with hockey, that we welcomed him with open arms, and he delivered and was a big part of the Stanley Cup, scoring those big goals in 1989. So, as I say, it was definitely a big win for the Calgary Flames when it comes to the trade. So anyways, as I say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home to Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, I mostly do talk Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, like recapping games or talking about stories, or in case of this, trade retrospect from the past. And I also will talk about, I also talked about some signing retrospects that will be more to come. I try to line it up around the same time when it happens. But I also do a variety of other content like personal blogs, attempt at comedy, and I also do share my experiences when I'm on the road or at a sport event. So if that all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, you know what you do, just make sure you like, subscribe. I also have my other social links down in the description below. And I guess I can also open up in the comments as well, what other trade retrospects do you want me to look at? I do have others that I have in mind that I want to talk about. I would say maybe in a month there'll be another player that I think we acquired in 1986 that I think we'll look at I'll call that the biggest rental that the Calgary Flames have made. But I know, assuming, in the off season, in the summer, I might have a lot other Calgary Flames treasured specs. Because there's a lot of other interesting trades that I want to talk about that I'll dive into a little more. But I'm going to say this one definitely was a big win for the Calgary Flames. But the St. Louis Blues, they won a few trades themselves that we made with them. I would say Brett Hull and Jay Bouwmeester as well, where I already talked about those trade retrospects as well. So I'm going to say, go Flames go, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.